All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Kelly. I'm a professor at Loyola Chicago School of Social Work. I direct the School Mental Health Advanced Practice program, which is a 15-credit certificate providing advanced training for school mental health professionals, school psychs, school counselors, school nurses, school counselors. I am here to talk about professional development as one of the changing role of a clinician topics that myself and my good friends at Midwest PBIS have identified as kind of key mechanisms for us to begin to shift the landscape for practitioners. This is going to be a focus, as I said, on professional development. We are very interested in exploring a variety of areas and mechanisms that bring us to kind of doing practice in new and dynamic, and we would argue more data-driven and effective ways. We have talked in other sessions about the crisis about crisis, how we think about and are often in a reactive mode in crisis situations in schools often dictates really everything else that we can talk about in terms of our role. If we're constantly feeling like at any moment we can be pulled from things to do other things that may or may not even be the best use of our time, that's a really serious issue, so we've talked about that. We're also very interested to just get into the guts of what may not be the most exciting thing in the world, which is the job description, a very necessary thing that I think we often aren't even fully aware of within our districts when we think about why it is we're doing what we're doing each day. What is that rooted in? Where is that going back to our principal or special ed director or whoever's doing evaluation for us? How do we understand our job description? And then can we actually modify or adapt our job description to fit some of the changing realities that we'll talk about today. Another session that we're very interested in talking about is just the very on-the-ground experience of workload and how that differs pretty dramatically from caseload. And so that's a lot of important conversation that we're having as well. All of this is building up to a variety of opportunities that we're going to offer people to think this through with us. Most importantly, we're going to be having a series of learning forums or leadership forums that will be taking place later this year. And before that, though, we're going to be focusing on these modules and these topics with a interested group of folks, and we're glad to have some of them with us today, and we invite more people to join us going forward. So today is basically going to be about professional development and how professional development in some ways is another mechanism that can drive a lot of different things in the school. Most importantly, I think it can build capacity of people in the school that aren't us. That can be teachers, that could be support staff, that could be administrators, that could even be parents. There's lots of ways in youth themselves. There's professional development that we can be providing in a variety of ways that a lot of us are providing, but that we want to offer you some ways to think about it today that might inspire you to go forward as a team and really take that on. Okay, so a big feature of the work I've been doing survey research and qualitative research, talking to practitioners about their roles for almost 15 years now. I was a school social worker myself in the Chicago area for 14 years, so I guess I'm getting close to the 30-year mark of having thought about and worked on this set of issues. It is really interesting to me when I think about professional development plans and what we mean by that, to reflect on my own training and how little of my own training was oriented towards putting me in front of a group of teachers, putting me in front of a group of anybody that wasn't a kid in a small group or a one-on-one situation, and expecting me to get up there and have stuff to say and to be confident in what I said and, tie it back to research literature or sometimes even more importantly, tie it back to the real needs identified in the school. Those were not skills that I was having really brought to me in my training. It's a lot of what I try to give my students now at Loyola, and certainly I think we see this as a skill issue as well as just a programmatic planning issue. The more we think of professional development not as something we bring in others to do or we go outside to get ourselves, but that we can actually generate and put together ourselves, I think we begin to modify our role just then and there, because people begin to see us in a different way. They see us as having content expertise that is visible. And all of us have expertise, and a lot of what we do is done behind closed doors by necessity because it is private, it is related to specific student needs, and should be behind closed doors. But there's also this other level that we can go to where we need to show what we know, and not just for our own benefits or some sort of ego issue, but to really show it so that the school can begin to do things with it. So a lot of this adds up to the almighty triangle that we all know and love in the MTSS PBIS world. Typically what we know on the left is a kind of ideal that I think we're certainly interested in Midwest PBIS and Loyola's SMAP program, which is that kind of tier 1, that prevention area, that whole school piece, which is the green, could be in a not even a perfect world, but a different kind of frame, could be a lot more of what we do. That a lot of what we know works is to get things earlier. That's true of lots of things. Early intervention is definitely something in the research world for a lot of different issues, and education is no different. Having things that get to all kids in the school, and then giving kids in that yellow chunk something that allows them to have a reteach or a refresh or even just a little deeper dive with it is often, in terms of the research piece, the most effective thing we can do. Research, as we know, doesn't always sit in collaboration with what's happening on the ground, however, and what we often see on the ground is the other triangle, where the overwhelming bulk of what we're doing essentially is tier 3. It's a little misleading when you look at that, because obviously the whole triangle is in tier 3 and we are not the whole triangle. But when we think of our time and how you spend your time, my guess is for a lot of you, and a lot of you that are leading people that are doing this work, it's likely that a lot of what they're doing is essentially reactive practice and or caseload practice. And the reactive practice work that I've done is that crisis piece. It's that sense that at any moment you could be pulled into anything. And then the real legitimate crises, life-threatening stuff, kids that are having psychiatric emergencies, but that ideally we should be seeing that not being the bulk of people's time on a day-to-day basis, and instead we are. So one thing we want to ask you as you go through this with us today is to think about how your time is currently being spent. I mean, how much of what you could say about your work would fit more in the triangle on the left? And the nature of tier 1 to us is essentially a coaching and consultation role for us. Again, schools are typically fairly good on paper with tier 1, and my experience in the research I've done, where they can order curriculum, they can hire someone to come in to talk about things that are at tier 1 level. And for today, I mean, I think you can insert lots of things in your own head about what tier 1 could be. It could be behavior expectations, it could be a curriculum that's related to academics, it could be something that's very oriented around a specific topic, say for school violence or restorative practices. There's a lot of things that we could think of as tier 1 that schools, I think, can get some energy around doing. The challenge becomes for people like us is how do we put our own spin or our own piece into that where we're not on the sidelines. And so what we've kind of thought about is thinking about coaching and consultation, being involved in helping set up structures, systems, ways of collecting data at the tier 1, whether that's screeners that allow us to understand people's youth experience of these things, readiness for these things, forming teams where we meet and look at these issues. A big thing I do with my certificate students is this is a place to do needs assessment, to really try to identify what are the issues that need to be focused on in the school. And then we can be, again, not in a secondary role, but really in a leadership role, being a coach or consultant. So to be a consultant, to me, obviously it's one of these words that means a lot of things out there in the business world, and we probably mean a lot of things even in education when we talk about it. The way I view it is that it's a role where you can set up or be involved in setting up structures that allow the school itself to behave differently around issues that you've identified and they've identified as important. So for example, we all know that there will always be kids who have disruptive behaviors, that there are disruptive behaviors that arguably in some schools can become the focus of everything, that becomes why they push the button for crisis, that becomes the basis for lots of special ed referrals, that becomes even an issue with teacher morale because they burn out because they don't know what to do with those kids. Our role in tier 2 can be to say, okay, how do we still work with a team and to allow those teachers and those other staff to equip themselves with tools so that they can make difference around these issues. And again, it's not to say that we don't have things at Tier 1 already in place, that we are teaching expectations, that we're building, as we'll talk about today, the professional development capacity of teachers even to intervene initially. But once things do begin to show up in terms of behavior, for this example, what are we doing at a Tier 2 level so it doesn't become what I see again and again in lots of the work I've done nationally and even internationally, where it becomes essentially, okay, we have a curriculum, we have this kid in our class, they've acted out, now you take him. And we know that that's something that most of us, when we see that and experience that, we say, what else has been tried? Why is this coming to me right now? What could be done in the classroom? And you know, in a lot of healthy organizational contexts in schools, what most principals and most really, you know, top-notch teachers would say at that moment is they would like there to be more skills and more capacity built for those teachers, so it doesn't have to become push the button and bring the social worker or bring the psychologist in. So again, what are we talking about? We're essentially talking about an in-house training and support model as well, so that if you have structures where you're talking about teaming and you've built teams and you have spaces where these things are being at least brought to awareness, how do you have ongoing training and support? And how do you build that for people to carry it past you? And that's a big feature of what we'll talk about today. Once we're in Tier 3, obviously, and all of us who've worked in schools as a direct practitioner know this, we will be doing direct work. We will be seeing kids, we'll have kids on caseloads, we'll be helping them you know, put together, in the case of kids with behavior issues, possibly an FBA and a BIP that allows us to do very intentional things with them there. But even at this role, we believe there's a role for consultation. And this is, again, related to go to a different example, not just behavior, but specifically kids with ADHD. We know that there's a really rich literature that says that essentially one of the best things we can do for a kid with ADHD in a school is to build their own capacity, so teach them how to self-regulate, how to work with what they have, but also to provide psychoeducation to their parents and to their teachers around kind of what these issues look like and how they present, and then to have an ongoing fairly structured relationship with their teachers around how their behavior is manifesting related to their ADHD. That is not just I drop this kid off at your class or at your office, you do something with them and they go back to your classroom, that it's really meant to be almost working with the adults as much as the kids. So again, if you're going to do any of the stuff I've just talked about for the last 5 minutes, you're going to have a professional development culture in place that says we don't just kind of see this as something other, that it's down the hall, it's the person in the office, the clinician that does it. It's something we're all part of. And the best way that we can think of to do that is certainly not to guilt trip people or make people feel bad that they're sending you kids, but to teach them some things about what it is you do, but also what they can do. And that's what we'll talk about now. And that's really what coordination, I think, gets at as well, is that if ultimately we're doing things that are meant to enlarge and amplify for our kids on the caseload level, we need to have that be in some ways feeding back through to Tier 1 and Tier 2 as well, because again, these tiers are not kids. These are levels of intervention, and kids can be in multiple levels at one time. And if we can have the ability to talk about how we're serving kids at various levels and have it be about the school doing it, and achieving a proficiency with that, I think that's where the action is. All right. And again, we know that this will always be where we go. This will always be part of our role. This is arguably, in a lot of contexts I've been in, this is what we're explicitly hired to do. That's why we want to get to that job description piece and talk about how can we enlarge that and deepen that role so that we're seen as doing other things. But I know that when I was doing my best work, even in this red chunk, I was doing it because I had this other kind of infrastructure built. And I would argue, and I think my friends in the Midwest would argue, that a big way we build that is that we have a professional development schedule and culture that is robust and rich and is carried out in large part by us. That it's not an expert culture where others come in and tell us things and leave, but that we may bring experts in, but we are in some ways largely organizing and forming the professional development goals, and then doing that with the eye towards that we're sticking around, that we're going to be part of this going forward, and you're going to be able to, say, hey, Mike, would you come and talk to me more about this thing you said in the faculty meeting last week? All right, so all of this is into service. One of my favorite slides we often use, and I use in my classes. So, we all know that when we graduated from our school clinician work that we were not given this magic wand that everybody seems to think we have, and that we should just have at the ready at all times to make kids better and to make schools better and make teachers less stressed. But that we know that once we stand with staff, when we stand to build the capacity of all of them, we do better work, they do better work, and the outcomes are better. And there's really not a lot of argument at this point that that's really the main thrust of, I would argue, what's going on with whatever acronym we're calling it these days, MTSS, PBIS, ISF. When we do this, and we do this as a team, and we do this as a school culture oriented towards it, all the things that we know matter for kids, even at the kids that fit at a tier 3 level of intervention, everybody gets better because it's a whole school direction. All right. So again, some of this I've said, but just to amplify, staff will feel more equipped to handle the minor stuff. And we know that minor stuff gets major very quickly. We know that there are school cultures where anything that's considered a problem is an automatic referral out, and it may not even be a formal written policy. Very often it isn't, but that's an understanding that teachers share with each other and that is modeled to them. We need to have staff feel like they can handle lots of things in their own classroom and just handle things amongst themselves. I mean, I like nothing more than to see a teacher handle something that I know I could have helped with and then come tell me about it. A big part is obviously this earlier stage. We get to kids earlier, we give them things earlier before they're escalated in the moment, but also before some of these things just get deepened and more serious. We know that a good deal of the research right now on some of the hot button issues that we're all concerned about, school violence, the disproportionality in discipline and special ed referral, the issue of restorative practices, trauma-informed care. I mean, there's a lot of things in the news, a lot of things on our minds as well. Many of those things essentially turn on staff-student relationships, that if we can be somebody who teaches others how to do relationship work better, which all of us got trained in, and I would hope all of us feel competent in doing, our schools get better. And arguably, again, much of what kids really take from schools is how they relate to the adults in the school on a daily basis. And most of us aren't that daily basis person. So how do we enhance that? And again, from that, all of this becomes hopefully a cascading effect where the culture and climate is strengthened. And then we're able to arguably focus more in that red part of the triangle on the kids with higher level needs in ways that are really meaningful and not in that reactive mode. So here's an example. I'm going to shift now to kind of, I've done a lot of kind of talking about things in a more kind of 30,000 foot view way. Here's a few examples of how people have done and could do this, and we're going to kind of take that to the conclusion today and ask you to think about this for yourself and think about what you might be wondering about how do I do this and how do I take this further. So this is just an example of a PD calendar. We know all schools have some time allocated for PD. All schools often have tensions around the time even allotted, whether it's work rule issues with unions, whether it's just a number of initiatives all going on at the same time. You often have to fight to get onto a PD calendar. That's why we're kind of recommending that you start from scratch at the beginning of the school year and arguably even the previous year to set the calendar and to really do this intentionally so that it becomes something the school gets accustomed to, that looks forward to, and begins to understand is not just a one-off training. I should have said this earlier, but another really robust finding that is not a nice one to say, but is nonetheless really robustly referenced in the literature, is the kind of sit and get training, or the train and pray it's sometimes called, where a person comes in, does a one-day thing, is potentially a great presenter, has great stuff to say, and then leaves and goes back to the work they do elsewhere. Doesn't really change practice. I mean, that it could be a good experience, it could have lots of good information. What changes practice is things like you're looking at right here, where a PD calendar that's rooted in needs identified in the school, that the school itself is doing for itself. So again, all the items you see here, these things could be carried out occasionally by outside experts, but we would argue that the best way to do this is to have in-house people do this and then be able to follow it up through the school year and from month to month. So let's just look at this for a minute together. An overview of the 3 tiers. One of the other things that we know about schools, and I'm sure true of the schools that people on today, is many new staff are coming on every year. So we can't assume everybody understands even the jargon that I talked about today. We have to break that down. We have to have explainers. We have to have ways that people can say, what is Tier 2? I've never heard of that before. So giving an overview of that and having some specific activities where we teach and we model and we practice these things. And this could be a great opportunity, in my view, to have somebody who is a veteran teacher who has worked really effectively with, say, a Tier 1 team get up and say, this is why this matters. When I first heard about this, I thought, oh my God, here's another thing on my plate. But now that I do it, I see it as really important. And as with all of these, there should be some evaluative mechanism we put into place where we're asking people to tell us what they did with this, how it affected them, what they thought of it. Very often when people do this, what they ultimately turn on is almost like a customer satisfaction survey. But some of that's fine. I mean, you want to let people know that just like all of us when we're out there in the field interacting with products and things like that, we want to be asked, what was this like for you? Did you like it? What did you not like? But it's more than that. It's more about like what kind of steps are you taking based on this information? And there's lots of things we can help with as we go forward together, Midwest and Loyola. And again, you can see there's lots of things that then flow from the overview of the 3 tiers on this model of a PD calendar. And again, most schools have some sort of set way they do PD. We're not here to tell you today that this is the only way to do it. One thing I think is really intriguing is, can you do PD in ways that aren't even necessarily you getting up in front of people all the time, but you may be doing something in a newsletter, maybe even doing a short video that's posted on a kind of inner listserv or some sort of way that you share things that way, creating a resource library where people can go look at things. There's a variety of ways we can amplify off of a meeting content. Some more examples from participants that were in our clinician leadership forum last year. So this is Ashley's building social worker, and she's targeting social skill lessons and curriculum that staff are going to be teaching daily. So she meets monthly with them. She co-teaches weekly in each class. So she's putting her money where her mouth is. She's doing it as well as talking about it. And I think that says a lot to teachers. Teachers are always very interested to know, do you understand what I'm doing? Are you willing to roll up your sleeves and do it? And I think doing it in the class with the teacher allows the teacher to see things and to work with them. And there's a variety of things. If you look at the bullet points here, where there's a way to talk about classroom management with teams after you've gotten into 1 month of the school year and everybody starts to notice that behavior and wants to talk about it. Mindfulness into weekly staff meetings. Another example that's not on a slide but that I just became aware of is a good friend of mine who's a co-editor of the schoolsocialwork.net site I run. She's begun a yoga club for teachers at her school. So she, as a yoga instructor, in addition to being a school social worker, and so she does that yoga club, and in that yoga club, obviously people are getting the benefits of doing that, stress relief and the feeling better. But she's also interspersing that with things about positive youth development, about how de-escalating ourselves or getting to a mindful place can help us be there for kids. And she's just started it, so I can't say a lot more about what the outcomes are. But I think it's really an interesting way, using stuff she knows to do something that fits a PD activity. And then there's a bunch of other things on this slide that you can think about. How many of these things could you do? What would you be thinking about doing? Could you put together a list, as Ashley has done for school year 18 to 19, to hit these notes and to bring people in with you? Here's another example. I think obviously trauma is all about us, both in terms of active situations causing trauma, but also an awareness of trauma. Many schools, I think, are trying to wrestle with this idea, how do we do trauma-informed practices? So again, not to just bring in an outside expert like people from Midwest PBIS or myself or other people, but to partner with those people maybe and bring some of those things in, and then have ongoing discussions at faculty meetings or even professional learning communities that you hold after school, where people can come and really do a deep dive and learn about these things. Some more big ideas from last year. These are things that hadn't really been implemented just yet, but people are interested in. This idea of refreshers. I love this. I think we're all strapped for time, and we also it's interesting. There are some things people want very quickly, and then there's things like podcasts and certainly binge watching TV shows, and people are willing to commit time to things they find really engaging. What I would say for most teachers in PD environments is you have to get to them quickly, and then possibly offer them things that could take to a larger and longer form discussion. So having a refresher of PBIS tiers and supports each meeting, I think, is a really wonderful way to keep it on the radar and to make people aware of it. Just a couple others on here. I have not yet myself used Flipgrid. I have some friends who use it in teaching social work practice, but I know lots of teachers in K-12 are using it now. So even incorporating that yourself with helping people learn new things and use Flipgrid with you and use it to give responses and feedback. My bet is there's probably in a lot of your schools a teacher who's already using that. You could talk to them. Certainly the restorative practices piece, we don't move a paradigm that entrenched of discipline and punishment and ideas around that without having ongoing refreshers, discussion, exposure. And my main concern about restorative practices is we're going to need to have those kind of naysayers or those doubters get up there at faculty meetings and other spaces and say, I had real doubts about this, but I see the benefit of it, and or even begin to lead these PDs with you. All right. Some more big ideas. This idea of modeling lessons, I think that's a huge thing to do. All of us, I think, have teachers in our buildings who are terrific at introducing lessons in their own content area. What if we partner with them to teach some of the core ideas we want to bring to them and have that done? Once you get teachers up and doing things in a faculty meeting, it takes a little time, but you can get them up there, and once you do that, it can be really fun. This idea of having the social worker or the clinician present at each staff meeting. Again, I don't want to underemphasize this. I think being known as somebody who has their time that they're on is really essential, and it features you. Again, it's not an ego thing. It's not a look at me thing. It's saying this role, this content I'm talking about matters, and I'm going to be talking about some version of it each month. And for lots of people I've worked with, it's a in-person stand-up thing. It's also getting on whatever the delivery that the district does on a website or some other way of delivering email newsletter. But being on the radar of people, when I do things with my certificate students, that's a big feature of the work that they do with me is I have them pick a project that they want to implement. A lot of it does relate to PD, by the way. And I say, how are you going to keep this on the school radar? It matters to you. It's going to matter to a few key people that work with you on it. But how are you going to let that larger, big, complicated school know about it on an ongoing basis? All right. So the last slide is kind of all right, now what? We've given you some ideas. Certainly, I hope we made the case that PD really matters, that it isn't just okay, let's sit here and get our paperwork done or do our grades or all the things that we know people sometimes do during PD. What can we get started on right away? And again, I know that one of the key pieces the literature has taught me is that if staff and leadership don't see the need for a topic, they will perceive it very differently. They'll perceive it as something they have to do. They'll perceive it as something they have to just get through. There's also a lot of evidence that veteran teachers have learned to essentially wait out new things, that, okay, this is the new thing, and a year from now it'll be gone. So one way I try to leap over all that and advise my students and the people I do research with around that is how can we right away initiate a conversation with people about what it is they want more info on. A very basic, simple thing that a wonderful school social worker did like 10 years ago now, and she still does it, is she does a yearly survey, interest survey with her teachers, and then basically builds a binder of resources on like the top 5 things that they tell her about. And it's good for her because it helps her stay current and it makes her think about things. It's often things she knows a lot about already, so it doesn't take that long. And then she's able to spin that out into, again, that 10 to 15 minute burst at faculty meetings where she gets on the agenda and says, based on things you all have been interested in, here's what we know about kids on the autistic spectrum, or here's what we know about kids with peanut allergies. And in no way does this presume you have to be a PhD, MD, public health expert, anything like that. This is where PD can really merge with reaching out and looking into things, maybe working with people like us. But being seen as that resource is really, I think, exciting. Who can help you do this work? Again, you're going to stand up at a faculty meeting if you do PD, and there will be those people doing their grades or those people checking their phones. And you want to have people up there with you who are respected in the school, who understand the school. Arguably, they should be, at least some of them, administrators and leaders that are respected as well. And you're going to want to, again, not make it about just here I am, but here's a group, and we're going to do this together. This may sound very basic, but no school is exactly the same compared to another school and how PD is done. Sometimes PD is set up very far in advance. Sometimes it seems like it's made up that day. I would get to know that very, very intensely and intensively. What do you know about how PD gets done in your district? Is it set at a high level? Is it set at a team level? Is the administrator somebody you get to in the summer and say, hey, here's my idea for a calendar. What do you think? Can I get some time? And again, like that may sound like very granular kind of basic work, but to me, when you get that work done and you're viewed as someone who has that expertise, you have the ability to really make a difference in your schools. So we're excited to hear and see what you all do with this information. Again, my name is Mike Kelly, professor at Loyola, and along with Midwest PBIS, we thank you for listening to us today.